Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for another installment of the Thirsty Thursday virtual tasting from the Maryland Distillers Guild. My name is Jim Bachman. I am the Director of Communications for the Maryland Distillers Guild, and I am your host today. I am joined by Scott Sanders of Tobacco Barn Distillery. Scott, how are you?
Very good. How you doing today, Jim?
Doing great. Scott's located out in Hollywood, Maryland, at his rick house there in the background, and we will be chatting with him about some of his wonderful spirits and their distillery and brand. So let me just welcome everybody this afternoon and say thank you for tuning in. Everybody kind of is aware at this point of the recommendations that the governor has put forward to keep everybody socially distant and kind of away from each other. During this time, our state's distilleries have been working under those guidelines and recommendations from the governor's office and have been able to offer spirits for sale to consumers. Most of our distilleries are offering curbside pickup options or delivery options. We'll talk to Scott in a few minutes about what Tobacco Barn Distillery is doing to make sure that you have the opportunity to get their spirits. I say all of that just to offer the reminder to you that if you have the opportunity to support Maryland spirits in this very chaotic time, we ask you to do that. Ask for Maryland Spirits at your local retailer, find a local distillery to visit and support them directly, or come to marylandspirits.org and see what options there are to support the industry and our members. So without too much further ado, I'd like to introduce Scott Sanders and have him kind of tell us the story of Tobacco Barn Distillery. Scott, on to you, man.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate the intro. The Tobacco Barn Distillery, we are on a former tobacco farm down in southern Maryland. It's a little farming community called Hollywood. So we're on a former tobacco farm and we're growing corn now to make bourbon. That's our main thing, and the business model, business plan all along was to be a bourbon distillery. We do make a few other products, and I'll go into that, but it's mainly a bourbon distillery. Obviously, bourbon needs to age. That's why we're in the rick house now. There's some of the barrels here, and then there's a far end. If we'll try to walk down there a little bit later to show you the 53-gallon barrels. We have about 3 or 4 years of 53s stored down there. And but the internet connectivity gets a little sketchy, so we'll wait to the end of this to go down. There's 3 of us who started it. There's myself, Scott Sanders, Sean Coogan, and then Dan Dawson. Dan Dawson was kind of the impetus for this. He grew up farming this land here with his father and his grandfather, doing mainly tobacco, and then they transitioned to corn and soybeans back in the 90s. They never took the tobacco buyout, so we can still grow tobacco. In fact, talk about that a little later. We have some of our tobacco right here, and talked with Jim a little bit earlier during the setup on how we smoke a little of our own tobacco down here when we're drinking our bourbon. It's quite a pleasant thing to do. So Dan, in the late 80s or late 70s, excuse me, during the fuel crisis, he had the number 3 license in Maryland to distill corn into ethanol for farm tractors. So he knew the chemistry, he knew the process, he knew how to get it done. And then fast forward a decade or so, Dan, Sean, and I, we all work together, and we like scotch, we like bourbon, we try a few things. And then fast forward a few years, I was in the Navy. I ran the counter piracy task force off Somalia. I used to hand out a bottle of bourbon and sign it to my international partners. So I gave out bourbon to the Chinese, the Russians, Koreans, people from all over the world. And as I tell people, I was the most popular date in the Gulf of Aden for 6 months because they liked me a lot better for giving up bourbon rather than a ball cap or a belt buckle or something. So I always had plenty of people who wanted to meet me.
So were you coining people while you were giving them bottles of bourbon, or were you just the bottle guy?
No, I gave them a coin too, because a coin is the usual thing. I'd always get a coin and they'd give me something, but when I gave them a bottle of bourbon, that meant something.
That's an awesome story. I'm surprised
Yeah.
Did you have any pirates trying to steal your stash?
No. The pirates were going after other stuff. So we had Actually, that's a whole nother long story about counter piracy off Somalia. But actually, during the time, what we were looking at then was more deterring it rather than interdicting them. So we were pressing closer to shore, disrupting their supply lines and those type of things. So I was fortunate never to have actually taken a pirate aboard, because once that happens, it really gets complicated, and it takes about 2 or 3 weeks to process the pirates and get them off board anyways. So I came back, I talked to my partners, as mentioned, about how bourbon has reliance around the world. People like it. Dan brought up that he used to make ethanol. And so we decided to write a business plan, do some industry survey. That took a couple, 3 years. And I didn't want to do anything until I retired. So I retired in 2013, and we started the business in 2014. And we've been going on ever since. We got our DSP, our permit, in 2015. It takes a year or so to get that. And we've been distilling bourbon ever since. And about, I think 94% of everything we've ever made is in this rick house right now. So we've had, we started off with rum. We did that not to get to market early, but because I'm a Navy guy and we do it for the Constellation up in Baltimore. I'm on the board of historic ships in Baltimore. In fact, let me grab the bottle here right now. What we have is this USS Constellation rum, and it's aged on board the Constellation. This is the what we call Voyage 3. It was just taken. We age it on the ship for a year. It's in our rick house about anywhere from a year and a half to 2.5 years in there. So it's about a 3-year-old rum. It's made out of 100% Maryland molasses out of Baltimore. What I didn't know before this is that Maryland makes about 10 or 11% of the nation's molasses supply right up in Baltimore, because it's a byproduct of making sugar. So it's a cool thing. We can make an all Maryland rum, but we just make a little bit. In fact, we are not proper rum makers, because if we were making rum, we wouldn't do it this way. We just make it up. We could fit 4 barrels a year on the ship, and we end up making about 5 or 6 barrels, because we have some other kitschy little things we do with rum, because it's hard to make exactly 4 barrels, so we just work it that way. But we started off with the rum, and then we had bourbon coming out. Like many whiskey people, if you're trying to get something out earlier, you put it in smaller barrels because you have more surface area. And we put out our mash bill is what we call rye forward. It has about 23% rye in the mash bill for a bourbon, so it's real spicy. And that's kind of a historical throwback to how Maryland did it a few hundred years ago. Started in 5s. That whiskey in that, we called it First Landing bourbon. That got us in Whiskey Advocate. So that kind of proved out our mash bill, our processes, and then we worked in the 5s and some 10s. We graduated to 30s, which is with the majority here behind me right now. And then we cut over to 53s about 2.5 years ago. And so maybe 3, actually our oldest 53-gallon barrel is 3.5 years old. But you got to cut into it. You just don't 1 week start going into 53s. You still have to keep making your 30s while you're cutting in 53s. So our 100% 53 production is probably about 3 years ago is when we did that.
And just to clarify for some of the folks that are out there who may not be familiar with the numerical terms, we're talking about gallons of volume that those barrels hold. So 5-gallon barrels are going to give you more surface area contact with the spirit, and then you graduate up in volume from there, right, Scott?
Yeah. And so what you don't do, the improper term is aging it quicker. It really doesn't age at all, because what aging does, it oxidizes and it helps smooth out the flavor. But what it does, you're able to pull in the tannins, the char, and the flavors from the barrel into the whiskey. And so you don't age it quicker. You're just pulling in the flavors because, as you're saying, you get more surface area to the volume of liquid. But one of the reasons we put this on the ship up in Baltimore is because even on the daily tide or a nice nor'easter, you get a lot more barrel action in the Constellation rum. So that's just one natural way of getting more barrel contact. And that now we age that and use bourbon barrels, but you still get more barrel contact, a lot more oxidation, as well as the temperature swing. So in the summer up there, it'll get 90 plus degrees down in the hold of the Constellation. And those good temperature swings push the liquid in the barrel, and then it comes out as it cools down. And that working the liquid in and out is what really helps out the flavor of your spirit.
And I think you brought up some great points there. Not many people have the opportunity to taste a white whiskey prior to any sort of aging or barrel contact. If you get that opportunity, there are several made throughout the state at Maryland Distilleries. Try a white whiskey, learn about what a base spirit tastes like, and then compare that to a spirit that's been aged in wood, like a bourbon or a barrel-aged whiskey, and you'll really understand how much impact a barrel can have on the final product that you're going to taste.
Yeah, and I think the other thing it'll show you is, especially if there's a lot of good, white whiskeys, white dog, whatever you want to call it, from other people, is most Maryland craft distilleries they're craft, and so they're doing kind of a pot still approach to it. They don't have continuous distillation. So there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of Kentucky because I drink a lot of it. I call it industry analysis. My wife calls it drinking, but you have to see how that works in there. But with the continuous distillation column, they blend it and everything goes in the barrel. Where if you're doing on a pot still, you can take cuts. So what we actually put in the barrel is not everything that's distilled. So it's a better product that goes in the barrel. So it takes less time to oxidize because you don't put all the things that need to oxidize out. And the other people do that too. That's not unique to us. That's more of how the craft distilling world works. So in reality, we put it's very expensive to distillate that we put in the barrels. It costs a lot of money to do it that way. Nobody in Kentucky would do it the way we do because it's too expensive.
So what you're saying there is you're taking the choicest point of the distillate and you're aging that, and you're saying that takes less time to get its age or to oxidize it all or whatever it is because it has maybe less flavor flaws or something to work through before it's final. Is that what you're saying? Or
yeah. And anything you distill, whether it's rum or whiskey or however you get there, you're going to have, the flavor profiles, the esters and some of the other people in there. Some of those taste, some of them don't. And what you need to do, you need to age them. That's why Scotch takes so long to, you don't want to try an 8-year-old Scotch. It doesn't taste good because he put everything in there. If you took Hart's cuts on Scotch and put it in, you wouldn't need an 18, 20-year-old Scotch. But they put everything in it. By the way, Scotch is really good stuff. There's nothing wrong. It's just different processes. And so there's a lot. And that's kind of the fun thing about when you get to craft, you get to try a lot of different things. So even though, Baltimore Whiskey Company or even some of the other people, we can make a bourbon or we can make something. It's never going to be the same as the other people because we're just doing different things. And it's like our own little chocolate chip cookie or oatmeal cookie. That's, at the county fair, everybody has a little bit more of a nuance to it. And they all taste better than a factory bought chocolate chip cookie. Well, that's kind of the interesting thing on craft.
That sounds like a glowing endorsement to have everybody who's watching ramp up their local liquor cabinet by supporting as many local distilleries as they can, right? Just for that approach, right. Every approach is a little different. It's all going to come out differently.
Yeah, and we're on a farm. We're on a 20-acre Maryland farm. That's not that big, and we grow the corn and we make our bourbon out. And then we source the rye from the Mennonites about 12 miles from us. They have a grist mill. They grind the corn and the rye for us. and the rest we do here. So it's all done in the local farming community. Other people grind their own grains. Hey, that's good too. There's nothing, and they get it locally, or they source it from somebody they know who's a local strain of corn or whatever, grain they're looking at. And it all gives it a little bit different flavor. And that just makes it different enough on your palate that you can tell the difference. Where if you're at one of the big bourbons or the big factories, they want it to taste the same in 5 years as it does today as it did 5 years ago. The craft people aren't looking for consistency in the taste, that it was 5 years ago. We're looking to make a really good tasting bourbon that comes out of the barrel that day.
I suppose your economies of scale are much different too. When you're trying to supply a global product, you need that consistency. It's almost like and I don't mean this in a way that's degrading at all, but the approach to McDonald's is that anytime you have McDonald's, it tastes like McDonald's. So if you are a larger scale distillery of any sort, you want that consistency so that all of the consumers that try your product are trying the same thing. And I think
exactly.
what you're advocating is that this small batch feel gives you the opportunity to embrace small differences and variation and learn how the product is adapting and how maybe the ingredients have adapted or changed over time. And I think that's really cool. I also wanted to point out that I really like that you continue to mention the ties to the farm there. I mentioned last week when I had Dan McNeil from Miscellaneous on how tied to agriculture distilling is. And I think a lot of people take that for granted. They don't truly understand that distilled spirits really come straight out of the ground and right into the process of being turned into grist and made into a distilled product. And I think that agrarian tie is very, very important. And I really like that you continue to focus on that as part of what your brand is. And I think that's really, really admirable.
Well, and that goes back to kind of our story here in that there's a little history in here too, in that we say in colonial America, the Catholics distilled and Protestants didn't. And so luckily in Maryland, we were a Catholic colony. So we got the Distillers. And Basil Hayden was born in our county. So Basil Hayden, he's the caricature on the old granddad barrel. He wasn't making bourbon back in the 1700s, but he was making the precursors to bourbon because it was corn and rye. That's what they had. In fact, that's why today Basil Hayden bourbon is rye forward, because he came out of Maryland. In fact, it was called the League of Catholic Families. They emigrated to Virginia, and which is present-day Kentucky, back in 1785. There was Hayden, there was Willett, there was Wathen. So there's a whole bunch of bourbon names that left Maryland in the right after the Revolutionary War. And as I tell people, that's how Maryland screwed the pooch on the bourbon because they all left after there. So we're just trying to bring a little bit of that farming culture back in the agrarian society, because back then they made bourbon and whiskey, or whatever you want to call what they were doing it. I'm sure they didn't put it in a charred barrel. I think they drank it all white because life was pretty rough in the 18th century in Maryland. And so they might have put it in a clay cask or something like that, because it's easier to transport, it's easier to store, especially if you had excess grains. And I had a discussion with a Kentucky distiller, and he said, well, Basil Hayden, yeah, he came to Kentucky and did that, but that was all because Kentucky was distilling. And I said, well, yeah, that could possibly be, but it stretches the imagination a little bit too much. That Basil Hayden would bring with him tobacco culture. They would bring all the names, and that he somehow learned to magically distill on the flatboat from Pittsburgh down to Maysville, Ohio. And everybody knows it didn't happen that way. They were distilling before there, and they politely agreed. And most of the bourbon people in Kentucky know about Pottinger's Creek, because that's where all the Maryland distillers went to initially. but they always start with history in Kentucky starts at 1792, not 1785. But that's okay. I mean, we're not trying to keep up with Kentucky. We'll never get to where they are.
Well, they say that the victors write history, right? So once we outsell Kentucky and bourbon and all that kind of stuff, then we can tell that story even louder.
Well, we will never outsell Kentucky and bourbon. In fact, when you're talking about, big bourbon and how they're doing, Buffalo Trace right now, I don't know if it's Buffalo Trace or Heaven's Hill has the largest bourbon factory on planet Earth, and they're putting in a rick house every 4 months that holds 56,000 barrels or something. I mean, and it's nonstop. I mean, it's a $1.2 billion project. So God bless them. They're making a lot. It's all going to taste the same. It's all good. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not going to have the flavor profile that you get, from your it's kind of like the terroir you talk about with wine. There's a difference to what you get in Maryland, to what you're going to get in Kentucky, and what you're going to get in Texas, and what you're going to get in New York. They're all just going to be a little bit different. And it's getting back to trying it all. You need to try a few of them and see which one you like.
Well, I think that's an opportunity for us to dream big, Scott. We can get there. Come on, let's get on board and let's make that happen.
Well, I was going to.
I was just going to say there's been a lot of talk about bourbon, and I know that's kind of what I get the sense from every conversation that I've had with you that you do enjoy bourbon, and that bourbon is kind of the identity of Tobacco Barn Distillery. Do you want to walk through what the Tobacco Barn Distillery straight bourbon is like, and talk about the tasting notes of that bourbon, and let people kind of have an idea of what that bourbon is?
Sure. Yeah. So we start out with these two things. This is corn we grow, and this is rye from the Mennonites. A lot of people don't see the whole grain, so they don't realize that's rye. And then we mash it. We make basically a beer mash. Everybody knows that if you're distilling. We do it in 900-gallon batches. That's the size of one of our batches. And we use water here from a deep aquifer. So our well water moves down about 380-ish feet. It's in something called the Piney Point Aquifer, which is a ancient aquifer that goes back to the Ocene age in Maryland, back when dinosaurs were roaming Maryland. So it's a good, neutral, clean water source, pH of about 7.2. There's nothing in it. In fact, we go to Penn State's Ag Extension Agency just so nobody can accuse us of using Maryland Ag Extension and have a hometown rep to get our water tested. And it's 2 significant digits less than what's allowed in Kentucky for any of the minerals. I will get a question quite often. Yeah, well, you can't really make good bourbon unless you have limestone filtered water. And that's not, again, true. It's you can use limestone filtered water, but the reason you want to use limestone filtered water, especially is in Kentucky, because you have coal mines and iron ore in the soil there. And we don't have that in Maryland where we are. We're down in southern Maryland. It's basically a sandbar that ends up at the Chesapeake Bay. So there's none of this stuff in the soil down here that you'll have in other areas. So we're very conscious of the purity of the water we have, the corn that we grow, and the rye that we get from the Mennonites. Start with that. We make a 900-gallon mash, roughly. And from that, we'll fill 253-gallon barrels a week. That's our production. And we've been doing that for about the last 3 years. And that gets us to, in industry numbers, 5,500, 5,800 proof gallons a year. And and we're only releasing right now 400 cases a year. So we have a couple step functions that will be coming up because not all our bourbon's aged enough yet. Right now, what we're releasing is, and that we'll taste that right now, is a bourbon in a number 3 char 30-gallon barrel that's aged for 3 years. We get about a barrel a month right now that comes of age, and then we release it. And is those who know on barrel aging, all barrels aren't the same. They're all have their personality. And so you have to check them and make sure it's ready to go. Some are actually ready to go a little bit before 3 years. Some you want to leave a little bit longer. We like the 3-year point just because people get focused on a number and they think that means something other than, the taste profile and the cuts that you take in there. So our hearts cut that we put in the barrel is actually pretty small. But let me pull some out right now.
While you're pulling that, I'm going to ask you a quick question.
Sure.
You were just saying that are you packaging as the barrels come of age, or are you setting barrels aside and blending?
No, we don't blend. We just do. We plan on doing single batch, and that means when we do, that'll be 2 barrels. There's 1 batch. So, but right now we're at I'll call it the single barrel stage. So as we pull a barrel, because 3 years ago when we were making this, we weren't on our batch system yet. We can't, and so the documentation for our 30s and our 10s and our 5s doesn't align with our 53s. So we're on batch. I think we just put in batch 166 today for our 53s. But that doesn't relate to how we did it in 30-gallon barrels because that was, over 3 years ago. You kind of change your processes as you get into it and your numbering systems. Don't worry, federal government. We still have your tax ID number on it. You're still getting your money out of it. If we got anybody from TTB listening.
As long as Uncle Sam's getting paid what he's owed, he's a happy camper.
Well, that's exactly right. So this is, we just bottled this on Sunday. It was pretty good. So we at least have a half a bottle left. Conveniently, we also planted our corn on Sunday. And I call that our 2025 bourbon crop that we put in the ground on Sunday. So we use, this year we did a 109-day corn. So that it means it comes to maturity in 109 days. But for field corn that we use for our bourbon, you let it dry in the field. It has to get down to about 12, 13% moisture content before you harvest it and put it in there. And we'll usually harvest in about October, even though the corn is ready in 109 days. But the tricky thing, it's raining today, which is good, putting some good water on the corn we just put down. But the key piece here is about in June, we need it to be raining when the corn's tasseling because that's the key event there, and that increases your yield on it. So bring up my Tobacco Barn Distillery Glencairn glass. I guess there was too many engineers had too much time, and they figured this is the right way to taste a good whiskey. So we'll try some of that. Switch around there. Apparently, this is great for your to nose it. I get some of the. Now I'm not the best taster. Actually, Susie, the wife, our master distiller Dan, she's the best taster. In fact, she's the one who approves. We never bottle anything unless Susie says it's ready to go. And so this is Susie approved.
It's always nice to have someone around whose palate you can trust, right?
Yeah, and it's not. Some of it is a skill, and some of it is your God-given talents, the nosing and other things. I just don't have those receptors and wherever. I know what I like to drink, but I don't. I don't have those receptors in my nose and mouth and those type of things.
And while you're giving that bourbon a taste, I just want to give a shout out to John Cook of Blackwater Distilling. He's on. He said hello. So just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge him. Great to see our members in here. And Edward asked a question that I'm sure we can address when you get to the USS Constellation rum, but he's been looking for it and is just curious if you may have some ideas of where it might be available. So keep that in the back of your mind for when the rum comes up.
Okay. Yeah, and tell John thanks. And I think that's a good thing to point out is that when you get to the Guild in Maryland, I don't know what our membership is now, 24, 26, something like that. Everybody helps each other out. we have, if it wasn't for John at Blackwater, if it wasn't for, people in the guild, we would have had a much harder time starting. So there's really no competition in the guild here. Jamie at Lion, she was incredible getting us started, and she was very helpful. People all around the state have been really helpful getting us going here. So what I get out there is the spiciness of the rye. This is actually pretty smooth. It's a little bit smoother than the last one there. You asked me what kind of cocktails we know this. This is how I drink it, just like that. I might put it on ice, or in an old fashioned, but I don't put too much simple syrup in there. If you need something sweet, work it that way. But I do it just like this. This in a cigar is just awesome. So I'll put this one.
Now you're speaking my language.
Yeah. Next one I'll do here is our rye. And this is, we don't do a lot of rye. We do about a month of rye a year. And for those who bake, if you've ever made rye bread, it's real sticky, and it's real sticky in the still also. So the mash is a lot stickier. It's a different process. And what we do is we reverse our mash bill for the rye in that, again, this will be about 24% corn, and then the rest is rye in there. So this is Maryland is known as a rye state. We had, there's a lot of people making some really good rye. And I don't know if you've ever tried the Epic rye. Oh my God, is that those guys hit the mark on that one. That's a really good rye. Yeah, that's you can nose the rye right away on this. And this is I like this in a Manhattan. So if I'm not drinking it neat, this is a great Manhattan one.
A little bit more testimony to the fact that competition is not the first thing that comes to mind in Maryland. We have a rye whiskey producer complimenting the rye whiskey produced by what should be considered his competitor by all stretch of the.
Well, I'll get back to it. We're not in competition with each other. It's like we're all making an awesome craft product, and we're just sharing it with people. Now, some people, they might like a rye from here or a rye from there. They might like it from Sagamore. Sagamore is meant for a specific market. That's fine. These are both 90 proof, the bourbon and the rye. That's about where, we like our whiskeys at. This one has our little, our mini Glencairn class here. In fact, we got these from Scotland, and our tasting room is almost finished, but due to COVID-19, we're not going to open till whenever we can open. And then these will be what we'll be using for our Distillers tour when people come in. But you can really you get a little bit of the sweetness of the corn, and there's on the backside, there's a lot of rye, but it's not a harshness. Okay, now we're going to go to, you're saying the Constellation. So I've got a different cup for this. Throw out here, shout out here to Maryland Distillers Guild. So we'll, now this again is, I heard you said somebody was looking for it. This is called Voyage 3. We just bottled it, and I just delivered it to Total Wine in Laurel last week. So it's up at Total Wine in Laurel. It's down here in Southern Maryland, and then it's also at Bay Ridge Liquors in Annapolis. They will have it. I don't know where the person was asking about before, where to get it, what part of the state they were in. But we get about 1,400 bottles a year. It comes in a little commemorative tube if you get it from us. And every voyage is a little bit different because the weather every year on the ship's just a little bit different. So it will go with the
Edward, if you were listening, Scott did just say that there were a couple options there to pick this up. Just want to make sure that we called that out.
Yeah. Yeah, so this you get a lot of vanilla notes on here. You get a lot of the barrel in there too. Just as an aside, as I said, we use number 3 char barrels for our bourbon and our rye. Barrel char is not linear. For those who don't know, there's number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. So number 1, these aren't exactly right, but they're close. Number 1 is about 15 seconds. Number 2 is 30 seconds. Number 3 is 35 seconds, and number 4 is 45 seconds or something. So that they're burning the inside of the barrel. That number 4 is an alligator char, so that'll really get you a smoky flavor in there. So we've settled on a number 3 char that seemed to get the flavor profile we were looking for.
Scott, do you have anybody a little bit closer to you, Southern Maryland, retail-wise, that carries the USS Constellation rum?
Yeah, what county? It's at Nix of Clinton and Nix of Prince Frederick, if they're looking for it there.
All right. We just got an answer that said Southern Maryland. So, Edward, if you can find Nix in Clinton or in Prince Frederick, those 2 locations are good ones.
Yeah, and if they're in I'll say Calvert County, down at Portical Liquors in Solomons. Yeah. And then last thing I'll do is this is our Maldier cinnamon whiskey. Now we make that. This is an all natural. It comes. Let me see here. I got this one a little icy here. So this we use our bourbon mash. So it's the same mash that we make our bourbon out of. We just divert it into a used 53-gallon barrel. So it's whiskey at that point, not bourbon. And then we use 2 varietals of cinnamon bark. And that cinnamon bark colors it and flavors it. So it gives you a nice red color. It's got a cinnamon, you get the cinnamon right away. It's a nice mixable whiskey. So in winter, you put this in a craft apple cider. It's awesome. It works out really well. You put a fifth into a gallon of apple cider. So it's, 5 to 1. That's kind of how you cut it. Or if in the summer, a nice cool drink, you do a like a strawberry lemonade, the same type of thing. You can make it by the gallon. You can make it by the cup. You just make it 5 to 1. It's a real nice, pleasing taste. The cinnamon actually tricks your brain. It makes it taste a little bit sweeter than it actually is. But we use cassia and Sri Lankan cinnamon. You put about 2.5 pounds of cassia and about 12 ounces of Sri Lankan. Those 2 different flavor profiles really just make it a nice tasting cinnamon whiskey. It's not hot. It's just a good, smooth, and it's all natural. There's no chemicals, no funkiness. There's some other products on the market that are, cinnamon whiskeys. They have no cinnamon. They have no whiskey in it. They're like the Twinkie of the distilling industry. Yeah. And then I didn't mention our tasting room. One of the things we're going to be doing here is showed you we grow a little tobacco on the farm, and we roll cigars down here. And so we'll have an area where people can smoke cigars and try the bourbon down here outdoors. And people ask me, "Hey, Scott, where'd you?" Like you asked me before, "Hey, do you have a professional cigar roller?" I said, "No, but I have YouTube." so here's a little mold we use for rolling cigars. You just get these off of Amazon. And is it the best rolled cigar in the world? No, it's not. Is it the best cigar you've ever tasted? It absolutely is. Because if you roll a cigar and smoke it with fresh Maryland tobacco, it's the best damn cigar you've ever tasted. It is an awesome experience. So we'll be doing those type of things. We're going to be having the
cigar aficionado,
the tobacco
right?
bourbon piece when you get. What's that?
Sorry, I was saying the next step for you is cigar aficionado.
Yeah, no, we're not going to do that. It's hard enough doing bourbon. We try not to get diverted too much.
So it's great to know that you do have some connections with retailers throughout the region. How about right now? What's the best way for anybody who's watching to get Tobacco Barn Spirits? Are you guys taking orders online? Are you providing for curbside pickup? Are you delivering anywhere? What are the options that people have?
Yeah, we deliver. In fact, I actually, when I went up and delivered to Total Wine last week, I did some few bourbon and rye deliveries up here at White Marsh last week. So we're delivering. We don't go to Western Maryland yet, and those type of things. So I ask people, I say, hey, if we can just coordinate it with some of our other deliveries. So yeah, people call up and they tell me where they are. And so we are doing deliveries. We do have, we're at a couple farmers markets down here in St. Mary's County. And we're not, we go to one a week on those. This time out with COVID has actually worked a little bit in that we're finishing up our tasting room, and like a lot of other distilleries, we're doing our best to put out hand sanitizer. So we take in the process that we make each batch, you got heads and you get hearts and you get tails, and we put the hearts in the barrel. But before that, you get the four shots, which you don't want to put in anything. It's undrinkable. It's high proof. It's the first stuff that comes off. And that's what we're making hand sanitizer out of, because as a bourbon, our still is optimized for bourbon. So we never really get that much high proof alcohol. So what we are making, we're turning that into a hand sanitizer for the local county emergency services. And it's not a commercial product. We're not selling it. It's just going to the county that way there too. So that is taking up a little more time because we're not that efficient at being a pharmaceutical producer. So that actually takes up a lot of time to make hand sanitizer because, we're not optimized. We know how to make bourbon. We don't really know how to make hand sanitizer other than following the FDA guidance.
Well, the beauty there is that you have something to keep everybody occupied when things are a little slow. You're able to put a great talent to use because it is a specialized approach to manufacture hand sanitizer. And we've been pointing out some of the news articles that are out there. There's been an overwhelming amount of media about the number of distilleries in the state manufacturing hand sanitizer. And we've shared some of those stories, but the same story over and over again about the sanitizer could be a little tiring to read. It's great that about 80% of our members here in the state are currently or have been manufacturing sanitizer for first responders and places that need it most. So that's great. And you're working directly with the county for that?
Yeah, we just get it to the local county EMS. And what it's actually done is too, it takes away one of our byproducts that we'd normally either burn or use for cleaning stainless steel or something else, and it puts it to a useful use. We have, so for our spent mash, that goes and we have one farmer that picks that up and they feed their cattle with. And then you get what's called backset, it's the liquid portion. And that actually is very advantageous for cattle also. So we have one cattle farmer who takes our backset. We get her about 300 gallons a week. And she says, my girls love it. So when you get that, the pH is pretty low, 3.4, 3.5, which might be sour to our taste, but the cattle really like it. It's got some vitamins, it's got some nutrients, sure isn't bad for them, and it helps them in their digestive. So we recycle and reuse as much as we can. In fact, I was talking about our well water here earlier. We recycle 100% of our cooling water. We've got pretty extensive geothermal systems and others, not because we wanted to put that much money out for it, but because we're on a farm and it's about soil conservation. We just don't want to flush that water away and waste it all the time. All that water, we reuse it, we reheat it, we cool it down, and we cool it in the ground, bring it back on up. And that way it's not flushing, because we're on the headwaters of the St. Mary's River, would flow right into the Potomac and into the Chesapeake Bay. So as I was telling people yesterday on Earth Day, farmers are the original environmentalists in this nation, because we're all trying to take care of the land.
Well, there's certainly no better advocate than somebody who relies on the thing that they're that they're taking care of, you know.
You
What
want
else
to
is
walk
going
around the
on?
rick house, see if that works? Or you
What?
have another question?
I was just gonna say I was gonna give everybody in the comment
I think I
thread
just
here
lost you.
one more second to ask anything. Oh no. I heard Scott say I just lost you, and then we got his photo. So I'm not sure.
You there?
Are you? There he is. He's back.
Yeah.
How's your battery doing?
I think that glitch was, it said it was getting low, but that was just a glitch. So I got battery. If you want me to walk you around the rick house?
Yeah, why don't we do a quick tour of the rick house? We haven't had too many walking tours in this format yet, so why don't we do that real quick, and that'll give people time to ask any more questions they may have.
Okay, so right now I'm in the 30s, and I'll just turn around. We have a wall behind me here. You'll see that those are 15-gallon barrels. So those are personal barrels. So people buy a personal barrel for us, and then they can decide how long they want to age it, what proof they want it bottled at, and that type of thing. So it's our basic bourbon mash bill, goes in a 15-gallon barrel, and then they can change it any way they want.
Do they have to be a member of a club or anything to do that?
No, we're going to eventually have a club or something like that in here, but that'll be once the tasting room opens. So turn around here. You can see we have some of our barrels are upright. Some are laying on the ground. And the reason that is because when we'll go to the far end, when we build our ricks, they were laying down, they went the entire length, and we started losing space on the floor, which is a good thing. So then we put them upright this way, because that way it's easier to transport with the forklift. You can get them around easier if they're on the forklift there. So let's see if we can walk down this way. Hopefully you won't lose me here. Coming down, we do have some special projects, like right here. That's a 60-gallon wine barrel. We're making got some whiskey, and we put it in a wine barrel. We'll see what that tastes like. That's and even though we're mainly a bourbon distillery, we do a couple little experiments, stuff that'll just be available here at the Rick House. You can see right here. So here's this is a bottle of our rum. It's a used 53, and then here is a new 30-gallon. You can see kind of the relative difference in the size there. And as I roll around here, I'll show you. So on the floor there, you see some of these barrels right there. Those are the ones that will be going on the USS Constellation in a year from now. So we make the rum ahead of time that we put on the Constellation, and then we put it on the ship for a year, let it roll around, pull out all those flavors, get that stresses on the barrel from the hot summers in there, and then go in. Now I'll show you here. Here's the Rick House down here that has all our 53s. And this little aisle here. And these ricks, 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll start at the back. In the back there, we have I think it's a January 2017 53-gallon barrel back there. And then here's the rest of them up in here. So anyways, I just figured I'd give you.
Well, the virtual tour is much appreciated, especially for folks that may not have seen the inside of a rick house before, or understand what its value is to the distilling operation.
Yeah. So walk over here. If it's not too, here's one of the cool things. We still keep connectivity. So I'm going to walk outside of the Rick House now. It's raining here a little bit. So here is, as I'm walking by Here's the distillery in here. It's a converted goat barn. And then as I'm walking up this way, this is where we just planted our 2025 bourbon crop. So this is kind of it's a really unique thing to do, to be able to grow a grain that you're turning into an awesome product that you drink. So that's the farm, and then farther up there beyond the hill is where our rick house is. I mean, not our rick house, our tasting room.
And you think that's going to be ready to open right after we get kind of released from the stay-at-home order?
Of our tasting room beyond the hill up there. So, can you see it back there? Right over there with the little peak?
Yep,
that's the tasting room up there.
I think we're getting that. I think we may have had a little bit of a disruption, but you expect to be opening the tasting room to the public as soon as this stay-at-home is lifted?
Yeah, I would say July or June, July, something like that. And we'll be able to pull in, we expect to do 6 to 8 people at a time. And so we'll be taking reservations on our website and those type of things, because it's not that big of a tasting room. It's meant to be a kind of an intimate bourbon experience, not having tour buses. So we'll have it in there and have it working that way.
I'd like to say hi to your friend Kurt Coughlin in the comments. I've had a chance to meet Kurt in the past. He's a great guy. He said he loved the tour, so good job.
Okay, good.
And also want to say hi to Edgardo from Twin Valley Distillers. He hopped in, another great bourbon distillery here in the state of Maryland.
I tell you what, Edgardo up there, he helped us out getting barrels. He helped us source barrels originally there too. And then Mark and Arch up at Old Line, they helped us. They helped us out at equipment when we started. Everybody in the guild helped us out at the beginning. So it got us all going. It's amazing what people do to help you out here. That's one of the real values of the guild.
Well, Scott, I'm not seeing any other questions here. It sounds like folks can reach out to you to purchase their spirits and pick them up there at the distillery. They should also be looking for Tobacco Barn Distillery products in their local liquor stores. At least ask for them, and there's a chance that they can get them, right? If a retailer's reaching out to you, you're happy to get it there, it sounds like.
Yeah, so we usually, if somebody didn't carry it, they can call me and they can order a case and they can carry it.
Very good. On that note, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time this afternoon to join Scott and I. We really appreciate it. Distilleries across the state are open for business. They're looking forward to you placing your orders either for curbside pickup, delivery, or carry out from the tasting rooms. We're all waiting anxiously for the opportunity to settle back into distillery tasting rooms throughout the state and sample spirits, drink cocktails, and take spirits home with us. Thank you for your patience and for your ongoing support. Again, I do ask, if you have the opportunity to go out and purchase any spirits in the next couple of weeks, you consider supporting a Maryland distillery first. These small businesses employ your neighbors, and they rely on their communities to support them through these tough times. Scott, thanks again for coming on this afternoon and taking the time to talk with me. And if anybody has any questions about Tobacco Barn Distillery, they can find your website at tobaccobarndistillery.com.
That's it. www.tobaccobarndistillery.com.
Great. And if you have any questions or interest in learning more about what the Maryland Distillers Guild does for the state's spirit industry, please reach out to us at marylandspirits.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those great things. Scott, have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much.
Okay, appreciate it, Jim. Good talking to you.
You too.
See everybody. Stay safe out there.